all of that. Here for all of that. But it's really great to see you guys. It's great to be here for a second year of this wonderful conference that I think is so important and pivotal in the life of our children, specifically Black and Brown children, and specifically Black and Brown educators. It's so important for us to come together to discuss best practices, to discuss the ways in which we will continue to educate, empower, and inspire our children. And so I'm really excited to be sharing with you guys, or you ladies, today. And we are going to jump right in. So I am hoping that we'll be able to get through all of the pieces to the presentation. I'm believing that we will. And so we're just going to move. And if I'm moving a little too fast for you, just maybe put up your hand and be like, slow down, brother. All right. So today's session is entitled The Heart and Soul of SEL, Developing Strategies to Incorporate Social Emotional Learning in Daily Instruction. I am Brian Keith Harris II, facilitator of this session, but also a 16-year veteran in education. 9 of those years I have spent as a school leader, vice principal of a performing art elementary and middle school, and currently the director of outplacement and graduate support at an all-boys tuition-free kindergarten through 5th grade school in Washington, D.C. I also have 2 other all-boy organizations. One is a consulting organization, one is a dance company that I've had for 14 years, and the author of 2 books, Freedom's Design and the new children's book, I Am My History. And so I'm really excited to be here with you guys. I also have a son who's 20 years old. And so I've been doing the work of education for a long time, including the one who lives in my house. All right. And so I'm excited to be with you guys. So we have 3 objectives for today. And I'm really hoping, like I said, that we'll be able to get through and maybe even have some questions and answers during this time. So the first thing we want to do is really just identify 6. I say 6, but I think we're going to just kind of scale it back and just do 5. So we're just going to change that 6 to 5. We're going to identify 5 SEL building blocks. Secondly, we're going to discuss why SEL is essential in successful student outcomes. And then last, we're going to discuss ways to incorporate SEL, the SEL building blocks, in your daily instruction. And so first, and I know that we all know this, but it's important to have a definition that it can guide our session for today. And so social emotional learning is the process of learning ourselves, effectively managing our emotions, and establishing positive relationships and accomplishing personal goals. And so sometimes we kind of get those blurred lines of exactly what social emotional learning is, but it's really our children learning a set of life skills that is going to prepare them for the future and prepare them to handle and cope with life. But before we even talk about social emotional learning, it's important to talk about this concept that I call the invisible backpack. And so we need to take a step back before we take a step forward and talk about social emotional learning, because there are many factors that oftentimes impede us as educators teaching our children social emotional learning and development and skills. And that thing is what we call the invisible backpack. And so I want us to just take literally like 40 seconds to think about what our students are carrying to school every single day. Think about that student that you know who may look great on the outside, has a smiling face, but internally is really dealing with a set of stressors and a set of trauma that is really affecting he or she. It's affecting their academic progress. It's affecting their mental and emotional wellness. And it really is tearing them down on the inside. And you may even have students who you can visibly see that these things are happening. And so many of our kids, if not most of our kids, if not all of our kids, are coming to school with a set of traumas that are in a real sense really affecting their academic progress, and more importantly, not allowing them to develop those social emotional learning skills that they need in order to be successful. And so we want to just talk a little bit briefly about how does trauma affect the body or the brain? How does trauma affect the brain? And so we know that toxic stress can harm the brain's ability to form new memories, recall existing ones, and even neurons to shrink. In a real sense, when those neurons shrink, our children develop this inability to focus, this inability to retain, to bring in and retain knowledge, and then this inability to make those critical thinking decisions or have those critical thinking conversations or moments because of the trauma that they're experiencing and how it's affecting their brain. Repeated stressors without the opportunity to express or discuss and release cause the body and the brain to go into survival mode. So many of our children are coming to school every day in this survival mode. And when our children are in the survival mode, something is happening to the amygdala of their brain, and it causes their brain to be in a specific state. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But cortisol is a level that builds up in the body and brain, causing damaging effects to the brain and impeding academic progress and preventing social emotional learning. And so because our kids are coming to our schools every single day with this sense of trauma, with trauma in their lives, it is directly affecting their brain, which is directly affecting their academic outcomes and their social and emotional outcomes as well. So we as educators must first understand the trauma that our kids are coming with, and then we must begin to have the I think I was muted. Then we must have the skills necessary to respond to that trauma. So the trauma our students face daily impedes learning of any kind and keeps them from developing social emotional skills necessary for life. And I know many of you guys, just by show of hands, how many of you know at least one student who is dealing with so much trauma and they do not have the adequate social emotional skills that they need to be prepared? Absolutely. Absolutely. And so these are the effects of trauma in our children's lives. So when we look at the 5 building blocks of social emotional learning, before we look at those blocks, we have to look at how trauma affects those blocks. And so 1, it diminishes self-awareness. It causes our children to have a low sense of self. It disrupts self-management. So our children are not able to appropriately handle their emotions or the things that they're feeling as a result of the stress and trauma they're experiencing. And so we see some of those behaviors expressed in the classroom. It distorts social awareness. It destroys relationship skills. And so students are not in a space to really develop skills to be with other people because they are so focused on safety, so focused on fighting or fleeing from a situation because of that trauma. And then last, it dismantles responsible decision making. How many times have we seen a child who we know is dealing with a sense of trauma, who is acting out, and some of their behavior oftentimes causes them to make not the best choices or decisions? It's that trauma fueling those decisions or lack thereof. And so these are some of the behaviors. And again, we're going to do a show of hands at the end. I want to know how many people have seen at least one of these types of behaviors in their classroom, in children engaging in aggressive behavior, becoming withdrawn, fixate on their own safety or the safety of others, reenact a traumatic event through play, exhibit difficulty concentrating in school, becoming anxious or depressed, feeling intense guilt, anger, or shame, adopt a negative view of people and society. Do you have at least one student in your class who you know has one of these pieces? Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. And so this is so important for us to see how trauma is affecting our children's lives every single day. And we know that our children are going through all kinds of trauma, whether it's the loss of a loved one, whether it's a domestic violence situation, whether it's homelessness, whether it's an economic situation that's happening in their home. It can be even some trauma that's occurring between siblings. It can be neglect. It can be all of those pieces. And our children bring all of that to school, and we just start teaching. We just start teaching. We don't even think about the traumas that our children are facing and incorporate strategies and skills and things throughout the day to respond to that trauma. So I really want to encourage us all to develop these skills to incorporate in our classrooms so that we can adequately respond to the trauma and our kids can be healed. We want our children to be healed. So when we talk about the brain states, here are 3 of the building blocks of social emotional learning: self-awareness, self-management, social awareness. And so when we talk about the brain states, what ends up happening is that because our children are experiencing a level of trauma, their survival brain state says these words: am I safe? When the amygdala is constantly activated, we find ourselves perpetually scanning for potential threat. So our kids are not focused on any math. Who teaches math? Raise your hand if you teach math. ELA, science, social studies. Yes. So our kids are not focusing on anything that you're teaching. You created this amazing lesson. They're not focused on it. And they're not focused on it because they are always looking for a potential threat. Am I going to be embarrassed? Am I going to be singled out? Am I going to be physically harmed? Am I going to be emotionally harmed? So it's difficult for our children to really develop these skills of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, because they're not in the brain state that is conducive to them learning these in a safe way. And then also our students are in the emotional brain state where they're asking, am I loved? When the limbic system is fired up, we are seeking pleasure, the focus is escaping pain. So I know you're like, what does that mean? So you have a student in class who doesn't want to write, right? That creates a traumatic experience for them when it's a writing block. And so what ends up happening is that student begins to act out. They become fired up, not because they're fired up, but all because they don't want to write. And so what ends up happening is that our students then become their emotions become heightened, right? And then those behaviors persist. And then what ends up happening is that our students' ability to be self-motivated, our students' ability to control their behavior, our students' ability to manage their stress when they're in that fired up space is completely altered and, in a real sense, destroyed and diminished. And so what ends up happening is that we oftentimes get into those power struggles. And when we get into those power struggles, then we continue to re-traumatize our kids every single day. And so at the end of the day, we are, in a real sense, seeing our children functioning in these brain states, coming to school with these invisible backpacks, functioning in these brain states. And as a result, these areas of their social emotional learning is underdeveloped. It's underdeveloped. Our kids don't have a sense of self-confidence. They're not able to recognize their strengths because they're recognizing all of the things that are happening to them. Our children do not have an opportunity to set goals or have organizational skills because their minds are all over the place, right? From the trauma they're experiencing. And then they also don't have that ability to have empathy because I'm worried about me. I'm worried about keeping myself safe. And so our children are losing these social emotional learning skills because of the brain states that they're in. So the question may be, okay, well, now what? How do we get them from the brain states that they're oftentimes in into a different brain state? And so we're getting to that quickly. What we want our children to do is to function from their executive brain state. Because when they're in their executive brain state, then the question becomes something different. How can I solve this? Which automatically we see now, I'm aware of my emotions. I'm aware of how those emotions made me feel. And now I am ready to manage those emotions with the question, how can I solve this, right? It gets into the decision-making skills. And then even in the relationship skills, because when I'm functioning in my executive brain state, not only am I trying to solve this for myself, but I am more apt to work in groups where we are solving problems and thinking through things together. And so we want to really make sure that our children move from those emotional and brain states. We want to make sure that our children move from those spaces into their executive functioning brain state. That's really where learning can happen. That's really when our children can retain the knowledge and information that we as educators are trying to share with them. And that's also how we allow our children the opportunity to learn their own innate abilities, their own genius. That's really where joy comes from, because now our children have been moved to a brain state that is no longer concerned about the safety or no longer concerned about, am I being loved, because they're in a space where they know those things are free. And as a result of that, they're now ready to sign on for the rest of the day. So whatever the teacher has for them, they're prepared and ready to receive. So what we want is we want our children to be resilient. We want our children to be resilient. It is something that for our people is a cultural norm. We come from a group of people that have had to be resilient out of a sense of trauma and stress. And so we want our children to be resilient, not because of the trauma and stress, but we want to be able to allow those resilient actions to further our children's academic outcomes, to further their social and emotional outcomes, and to help them be successful in life. And so resiliency is the capacity to cope, adapt, and maintain psychological and physical performance following a traumatic event. So we know oftentimes when our students experience a traumatic event, they're not able to cope. They're unable to handle or grapple with. And so what happens is that level of trauma is expressed in a way that is destructive to the being and identity of our children. And so our students' capacity for resiliency can be accessed from their executive brain state. In order to access the courage to make skillful choices when they face adversity, they must have a connection to their inner being and understand that their body and breath are the most important inner resources to help them heal and transform. This is a good setup for what we're going to next. So in a real sense, when our children are functioning in that executive brain state, they have a heightened level of self-awareness. They have a heightened level of self-awareness. And what happens is that our children never get to that place because we as educators don't provide that opportunity and that platform for them to develop their inner me, for them to develop those self-awareness skills, those self-management skills. And so how can we, in a real sense, move our kids from these brain states, from these traumatic episodes, and turn these pieces into resiliency? When we teach our children how to be resilient, we prepare them for the rigors of life while also connecting them to their higher selves. And so in a real sense, this should be the goal of every educator. I am here today to make sure that my children are resilient, to make sure that my children have a set of skills that are going to help them be successful in life, and make sure that my children get to the place where they can recognize, embrace, and celebrate and act out of their higher selves. And so it's so important for us to now really clue into what are the ways that I can help move my kids to these places where they are able to make positive decisions. They are able to have effective relationship skills. They are able to have those self-management and emotional regulation skills. They have a sense of self-awareness and pride in order for them to be successful in life. And so Cat Williams is looking, and I'm sure many of you looking like, okay, this is good. We know the trauma. We know how it affects the brain. We know the behaviors that are seen in the classroom. We know the social and emotional things that are impeded by trauma. Now, how am I going to incorporate this in my daily instruction? And we know that teachers have a jam-packed schedule. There's so many things to do in such little time. And oftentimes, social emotional learning becomes the thing that is X'd out. It becomes the thing that is not given time or attention to, when it should become the thing that centralizes and, in a real sense, is right at the beginning of all of the things that we do as educators, all of the lessons that we teach. And so now we want to move into, now we know a little bit about social emotional learning. We know those building blocks, those 5 building blocks. We now want to move to a space where we say, how can we again utilize some strategies to help our children develop these skills throughout the daily instruction? So 5 strategies for incorporating social emotional learning into your classroom. 1, mindfulness. So I don't know if anyone was here last year. Wait, raise your hand if you were here last year. All right, yes. So last year I did a session on mindfulness. It was just on mindfulness and movement in the classroom. And mindfulness, for those who know, is really big and dear to me. Mindfulness is something that we oftentimes say, oh yeah, mindfulness, let's just do some breathing and we'll be good. But mindfulness is a way of life. And it's a way of life that we as educators must adopt. It's a way of life that we as educators must have an example or show an example. Uh-oh, I'm not sure what happened. Let's see. There we go. Are we back on? It's something that we as educators must show an example so that our children know exactly how to become more mindful. It's greater than the actual exercises. It's a state of being and it's a lifestyle of becoming more mindful of yourself, more mindful of your feelings and emotions, more mindful of others. And so mindfulness is something that is extremely beneficial in helping our children to develop these social emotional skills, particularly the focus on self-awareness, self-management, and relationship skills. Those are the three things, major things that come out of this idea of mindfulness. Also clarifying that thought leads to feelings. And so again, helping our children to process their thoughts, helping them to connect their thoughts to the things that they feel so that they can begin to make conscious decisions in life. Modeling persistence and determination, listening with empathy, and emphasizing gratitude. These are some strategies. We're going to dig deeper. So the first thing is mindfulness practices. Mindfulness is a type of meditation in which you focus on being intensely aware of what you're sensing and feeling in the moment. So when our children are experiencing this level of trauma, they are not aware of what they're feeling because their body is going, their brain is going. They're seeking either to flee or they're seeking to fight. They're not in a space where they're able to say, what am I really feeling? Am I feeling anger? Am I feeling sadness? Am I feeling embarrassment? And not only are they not oftentimes able to acknowledge or name or identify what they're feeling, but they're also not able to identify the physical impulses or the physical things that happen as a result of their feelings. And that is extremely important for our children to identify what they're feeling and then to identify how what they're feeling affects their body. What does it feel like when I'm frustrated? What does it feel like when I am angry? What does it feel like when I'm sad? What does my body do? So helping our children to be aware of those things in those moments are pivotal in them developing a sense of self-awareness. Because if I know the things that are making me sad, if I know what those emotions are, if I can name those emotions, if I can name how I'm feeling in those emotions, now what ends up happening is that I become a better communicator because I can say to Miss James, today I'm feeling disappointment, right? And when I feel disappointment, these are the things that happen. So Miss James, I wasn't trying to act out. I was just feeling a level of disappointment. How often do we empower our kids to acknowledge what they're feeling and then to make a decision about how can we respond as a result of what you're feeling? And so mindfulness really are practices that we can do at the beginning of the day, during transitions, or even during a classroom circle time. We can have these opportunities, and we're actually going to practice today. So we're getting to that. We're going to actually practice two of these mindfulness exercises today so that we can really see how it is that we can develop these skills and incorporate these things in our classroom so that our children develop this sense of self-awareness, so that our children are able to name their emotions and regulate those emotions. When I'm feeling a sense of frustration, here are the things that I can do. Here are the series of mindfulness practices that I can incorporate when I'm feeling these things. Self-awareness, self-management. Then we get into small group instruction. So where mindfulness really helps our children to develop those self-awareness skills, those self-management skills, and even those relationship skills. Because when I'm in a place where I understand my feelings and emotions, now I'm able to have empathy on you or understand when you're in those places and may need some things of me as your classmate or your student whenever you're experiencing some of those same pieces. But small group instruction really gives our children an opportunity to, again, focus on these relationship skills in a more dramatic way. And so during small group instruction, teachers have an opportunity to introduce students to developing healthy relationships with their peers. right? Teachers should teach lessons that discuss group dynamics and the effective ways to be in groups. So before we even start the year, before we even put kids into small groups, before we even start doing group projects, it's important for teachers to create lessons where we will talk to students about how to work in a group, identifying your own leadership skills in the group. We sometimes do these kind of Myers-Briggs tests to determine our own leadership styles, but it's important for our children to do the same thing. If you got two people in the group who are used to leading the group, you're gonna have a problem, right? And so it's important for us to create these lessons prior to putting our kids in these small groups and prior to having small group instruction, lessons that focus on our children understanding what it means to be in a group, what is the goal of being in a group, how do I function in a group knowing the kind of leader that I am, and then what is it, the outcomes that we wanna have by being in a group. So that's one piece. But when in small group instruction, when small group instruction is completed, when it's over, students can fill out exit tickets. Usually when we fill out exit tickets, they're all about checking for academic understanding. What I am suggesting is that we also have an exit ticket that focuses on the ways in which students work together and use those relationship skills to accomplish a task. Here's an example. When I was an educator, I did an activity with my students, probably the first 2 weeks of school, where my students had to build, some of you have done this too, where my students had to build a tower with straws. Has anybody ever done that before? No? It's a really cool thing. So if you have not, you need to try to get up on it. It's hilarious. So you have straws, you have tape, you have scissors, and you may have like a manila folder, right? I put my students in groups and my students, the marshmallow tower. Yes, yes, yes. So something similar. So my students had to create the tallest tower that was also the strongest, all of those pieces, right? And so put the students in group, gave them the things, and they just went and they did it, right? But when it was over, I began to ask questions like this. Who was responsible for making the final decisions? Who was the person that really worked to tape all of the straws? Who was the person who thought about the idea first? And what it did was it caused students to reflect on those things, but it also caused them to reflect on their own leadership skills. So much so, I remember one of the young men was like, yeah, I was the person who came up with this whole idea and we won, right? And so now what ends up happening is that now he sees himself as a leader who is creative. And so when he's in a small group, it's now helpful for him to say, listen, I am a leader who creates ideas. So I'm gonna create the idea, but I may let someone else execute it. So it's important in those small groups when they're over for us to not just focus on academic checks for understanding, but for us also to look at those relationship building skills that occur while in the group, because they are occurring in the group. We're hearing those conversations, we're hearing the arguments, we're hearing those things, but we oftentimes as educators don't address those. We just get right to the checks for academic understanding. So this is a way to absolutely work on that building block of SEL development in your small group instruction during your daily instruction, during those small group times. Also, asynchronous learning blocks. And so asynchronous learning, one, gives students an opportunity to choose their particular type of learning for the day within a particular time frame, right? And so this is something that is happening hugely in colleges and universities. And this is now something that is beginning to happen in elementary, middle, and high school. And so it's important for us to know exactly the benefits of asynchronous learning. So now this focuses on the social emotional skill of responsible decision making, because one, we're gonna have to release these kids to learning on their own, right? And for many of us, I know we're like, oh God, like that's not gonna happen, right? This ain't gonna happen. They ain't gonna be able to do this. But this is what they have to do to develop those responsible decision-making skills. So when we have these asynchronous learning blocks, which may look like this, teacher teaches whole group instruction, and then the teacher allows the student throughout the day or throughout that time to choose how they're going to learn, right? Am I going to learn from math on this computer? Am I going to learn from this center? How is it that I'm going to specifically learn for this particular time frame that my teacher has given me? It's more than just going to stations, because stations are all pretty similar. This gives students an opportunity to literally choose their own way of learning, which has to happen with some teaching. I am not telling you to go tomorrow or when the first day of school starts and start telling your kids, we're going to do asynchronous learning, go learn the way you want. Because y'all know that is not going to happen, right? At least it's not going to happen the way that you want it to happen. And so, but asynchronous learning really lends itself to our children developing responsible decision-making skills, because it causes our children, they have to produce a product, right? There are a set of deliverables that they have to have after this asynchronous learning block. But what we're doing is we're giving them and teaching them how to be responsible, how to make the right decisions to make sure that they're ready to receive, to give out the outcomes, or how it is that they're going to accomplish these deliverables. So it gives our students the ability to identify problems, analyze solutions, and reflect on their work. So the learning block also gives an opportunity to monitor progress. So students are able to see their own progress and now be the steward of their own instruction and learning for the day. So what happens is that the teacher says, okay, guys, we have 5 minutes. No, the teacher doesn't say anything until the end of the session. So now students are learning to be responsible for their own learning, and they're learning those decision-making skills, such that after the block, teachers can create a survey that gives students an opportunity to reflect on their academic choices and decisions. We did this at my school, and you guys, we would think that students would be so excited about learning on their own way. They begged us, please, can we go back to you teaching us and giving us the time? Can we please go back to that? And we had to push against that because we really wanted them to develop these decision-making skills. It's up to you. It's up to you to figure out your time frames. And Simone, as we talked before the session, fifth graders, they need to be able to do those things in preparation for middle school. They have to be able to be the stewards of their own learning and time. And so this is one of the ways to embed that social emotional learning skill of decision-making, responsible decision-making in your day that doesn't feel disjointed or outside of what you're already teaching. And so I want to stop because we need a breath, because it was a lot of information. So before we go into these exercises, I just want to open up the floor for question and answers. I saw there was a lot of activity in the chat, and I am getting a little older, so I wasn't able to do both. So I'm gonna just kind of go back. If you have any questions, please, 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 this is an opportunity now to let's do some question and answering, because the rest of the session will be us really practicing some of these breathing techniques for our classroom. So we know what we're doing when we go into the classroom. So I will open up the floor for any questions or comments. How so far this is resonating with you? Is this helpful? Are you going to be able to utilize these things in your classroom? So we'll pause for a moment for those question and answers. Yes, so Maria asked, could we go back to the 5 strategies? Maria, would you like for me to explain them again, or what would you? So here are our 5 strategies, or our 5 strategies. I'm sorry, not the 5 building blocks. These pieces, yes. So mindfulness, clarify that thought leads to feelings, model persistence and determination, listen with empathy. So here's the thing with the empathy. We have to acknowledge that oftentimes we as educators don't always listen with empathy. And much of that is because we are trying to make sure that our kids are learning a set of academic skills. And so when our kids show that they're unable to learn those skills or they're having struggle with that, we often don't have empathy. When I say empathy, meaning we are quick to tell our children to push through without giving our children the tools on how to push through, or even offering the understanding of why you can't push through. I recognize that you can't push through because you are dealing with a set of things at home. And the first thing that I need to do is recognize those things in order for me to, in order for you to be successful. So I have that empathy because I understand what's going on, right? And we move forward with the understanding that because we know what's going on, here are some skills and strategies that we're going to incorporate so that we can be resilient above those things that are going on. There was a question. You mentioned that you do relationship dynamic check-ins at the end of the group and or partner work. Can you restate some of the questions you tend to ask? Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. So when we do some of these relationship pieces in small group instruction, right? Some of the questions I may ask are, who started this? Who started the conversation? When you guys were building this tower, when you guys were starting this project, who was the first person to speak, right? That's important because the first person to speak is 9 times out of 10 the person who's going to be the starter of the project, right? So who was that person? Another question that we may ask is, did you feel like your voice was heard when you were in your group? Next question may be, what are 2 things that happened in your group that you think you guys could have improved in, right? Do you think your group worked smoothly? Who was the person who did all of the work or who did the execution of the work? All of those things are questions that can be asked so that students can really help themselves or help each other understand what their leadership skills are and how to effectively work in that group. Hopefully that answered the question, Jessica. Here's another piece. Okay, good. Okay, someone said they have no questions. Okay. You have given us a lot of useful information to get our school year off to a great start. Well, amen, and I'll shade to that, especially the concept of group work not only being content-based. This is my key takeaway. Yes. We have to find ways. I have 5 minutes left, so we got to go. But we have to find ways to incorporate social emotional learning in our daily curriculum because I recognize we have a lot of things going on. And what happens is that schools spend hundreds and thousands of dollars on SEL curriculum. And my thing is you need to spend that money on trauma-informed understanding and care in the classroom. Because if I have an understanding of that, I can find ways to teach my children these skills that they need to learn. I learned them, right? And so I think schools need to redirect where those resources are being poured into, which should be poured into trauma-informed care, understanding trauma, and understanding exactly how trauma affects and impacts student learning. All right, so this is what we're gonna do. We're not gonna do this one, mindful breathing one. We're gonna do this one. This one's one I love. I love this one. This is what you can do with your students, okay? So this is called the inner investigator. And this builds or begins the process of students developing self-awareness. One of the first social emotional learning skills, developing self-awareness. How do I do that? I listen to myself and the things around me, right? Or I lean on my senses to lead me. So you begin with 4 mindful breaths. So that looks like this: a deep breath in, deep breath out. We do it again, deep breath in, deep breath out. This time, and you can give children a choice. This time we're gonna close our eyes and we're gonna take 8 breaths in and 8 breaths out. So let's do it together with our eyes closed if you choose. Deep breath in, deep breath in for 8. Deep breath out for 8. Deep breath in for 2. Deep breath out for 2. And as I'm sitting in the silence, I am noticing things that I hear, things that I feel either in my body or outside of me, maybe the wind, maybe a breeze, things I may smell, and maybe even what I see. And we freeze. And when we're done with the activity, we ask our students to open up their eyes when they're ready. And then we begin to ask them the questions. What did you notice? What did you hear? What did you taste? What did you smell? And that begins the process of self-awareness. One of the things that happened to me the first time I did this is when I asked students to close their eyes. Obviously, when you close your eyes, sometimes you just see black. You don't see anything. When we went around in the circle and I asked students, what did they see, hear, smell, or taste, or feel? The one student said, I see my mommy crying. That right there is a pivotal moment because that student was, for the first time, able to identify what he saw, identify how he felt when he saw that. Now we can build on how we can move from what you saw and what you feel. And so this is an exercise that is very, very pivotal. It's very important if we want our children to develop self-awareness. That is the first social emotional learning skill that I think is one of the most important pieces for our students to learn. I am done for today. There is power at the intersection of teaching social emotional learning and academics. When we tap into this, we set our children up to have successful outcomes throughout their lives. And so I am praying that you guys will know that there's a powerful intersection between social emotional learning and academics. And I hope that you guys are able to take away some great things from this session. If you would like for me to come to your school and do this session, if you want for me to come to you or to a group of teachers, I am more than happy to do that. My information is here and I'll leave it up for just a moment. My website, briankeithharris.com, my email, briankharris02@gmail. And also I'm on all forms of social media under Brian Keith Harris. This has been a great time. I'm just so excited that you guys will now have these resources to go into your classrooms and begin to really change the way in which our students see themselves, the way in which they see each other, the way in which they manage their emotions, and the way in which they make decisions in life so that they can be successful in life. So thank you guys so very much. I will turn it over to Simone. Again, thank you, Simone, to end us out of today's session.